leave me alone. I don't remember him leaving, but the morning came and he was no longer in my room. I began to notice he would not travel to certain parts of the rental house, and I just ignored him. For years he never mentioned the red eyes in the corner of his room again. We moved around a lot after that, and finally we were able to purchase our own home, 704 Longford Drive. It was an older home for the area, early 1980s. The surrounding homes were in the 2000s range and actually had vinyl flooring instead of old scratched up flooring that was light, ugly brown and looked like something straight from the 70s. I used to study every scratch and scrape of the floor and would wonder, what happened there? Movers, dogs, children, or something else? Regardless of the home's obvious bland and aged interior, it was at least our home. It was an early cookie-cutter house though, you could tell. Every main room was on the first floor, and the second floor was a dominated media room with slanted ceilings for the roof and a huge walk-in attic. The attic was practically its own room, which I suppose my parents liked at the time due to their endless 80s furniture from Australia that for some reason they refused to part with. The most disgusting of all this furniture, the main offender, was a couch with fishes on it. A navy and yellow couch with very detailed fish on it that were a variety of colours. I don't recall when they finally got rid of it, but I'm glad they did. I'm glad they got rid of a lot of things when we left that house. It took a few years, about 5 to be exact, to truly realise something wasn't right, and it all started the night before my sophomore year of high school. My best friend Chelsea and I had practically grown up in that town. We had heard all the legends, laughed about them with our friends and boyfriends, but I guess that night we got brave. So we went to the local graveyard that was at least 200 years old and decided to wander around it and take pictures on an old digital camera. New cameras at that point in time. My friend Chelsea had claimed in the past that she would see spirits. To this day, I'm still not sure if I believe in that, even after what happened. I'm laughing about something stumbling through the graveyard like a disrespectful little teenage dirtbag, and we've all been there, right? Remember when you knew about death but still didn't process that it could happen to you? Sometimes I'm still like that. Chelsea stops laughing. I look back at her because the silence stuns me. She's white. She's a white Jewish girl, but she was unnaturally white at that moment. Her brown eyes look black, and they're big. She tells me that we need to leave, and then angrily reiterates it when I don't understand her. I feel something almost consume me. Just absolute dread and fear. Beyond fear, everything in me. There was no fight or flight. It was like it was broken. We just stare at each other, like we're gonna let whatever is about to happen, like we won't go home tonight and just accept it. Then Chelsea breaks, and I watch her run, getting further and further away from me, towards my little red Mustang on the horizon. I don't know how, I don't remember, but I ended up following her, and suddenly was grabbing the door handle of my car. Then when I was inside, the feeling faded. I asked her what she saw, but she said she didn't feel anything, and started to explain that she felt something but never elaborated. We talked about the camera, which I handed to her, and she began flipping through the pictures I had taken. They were unusually blurry as she scrolled. I saw more and more bubble-looking things. Dust, that's what I thought. I knew nothing back then, I suppose. She stared intently at some specific ones, then a look of rage came onto her face. She began deleting every picture, furiously, and in that moment I thought only one thing. Drama queen. I dropped Chelsea off at home. She said very little. I told her I would see her tomorrow at school, and she turned to me and told me to make sure I remove the SD card from the camera and to make sure all the photos are deleted. I rolled my eyes and ignored her. After she shut the door and turned away, I went home, laid out my first day of school clothes, and slept better than I had in ages. I think I slept better back then, honestly. Now I'm a serious insomniac with overactive REM cycles. My brother's room was right next to mine at Longford. We slept with our doors open. I'm not sure why. I think it was a childhood habit that I would never participate in today, and I don't think he does either. I woke up at 6:15 a.m. that morning to his panicked face wailing over me. To this day, I have never in my life seen him so frightened. He was screaming, and my memory tells me crying, wailing. "Someone came into your room," he tells me. "What?" "Someone's in your room, get up!" He dragged me out of bed and ran to the door, still clinging to me. I was more awake now and threw on the light, and I saw nothing except my tacky lilac room. He ran to the closet and flung the door open. Nothing but my gross mid-2000s clothes. He ran to the bathroom, threw it open, and threw back the shower curtain. Nothing. I turned to him, eyebrows raised, and almost laughed. His face turned paler. I woke up, and there was a light in the hallway, and I saw a man. He was older and had a long beard, and he floated into your room. I saw it. It's not a dream. Don't look at me like that. He then began crying from frustration. My parents had noticed the sound at this point had come in. He told them what happened. The first exchange between these adults. "He's on ADD medication. He's been having nightmares on this one. We should probably switch him." Yes, but would you if you saw Jesus?" My mother had noticed his face before stating this. It was a face of disbelief, frustration, anger, and horror. "I'm sorry, brother. I didn't believe you either." My mind had already begun to favor the adult side of things, too scared to admit that sometimes there are things we don't understand, too arrogant and egotistical. He moved out of that room soon after, and into the guest bedroom, and the guest bedroom furniture moved into his old room. I was now alone on that side of the house, which I enjoyed for a time. I rearranged my bedroom furniture as I wanted to participate in a change as well. One night, not long after, I woke up from the sound of footsteps in the hall. It was a small hall that only led to the now guest bedroom and my room. I figured it was my dad checking on me. My older brother had passed away when I was a baby, and my father never truly recovered. He would often come in to check on us while we were asleep. He just wanted to make sure we were still breathing. We were 3 of 4 children left. My older sister was married and now lived far away, and so we were always the babies that were left. I heard some steps. It was familiar, so I rolled over and got more comfortable, preparing to fall asleep again. And then more steps. I finally opened my eyes and checked out the door to look into the hallway. Nothing. Only the dim night light was staring back at me. Okay, he's walking around the kitchen for his late-night glass of milk, I suppose. I leaned to the right to peer past the hallway, but the kitchen light was off, and then I heard more steps. I was half awake and confused. I closed my eyes and listened hard. Where the hell was that coming from? My eyes burst open as I realized. I slowly followed my lilac wall to my ceiling, which was unpainted. I froze and stared in disbelief. The sound was coming from the attic. I had a lot of trouble sleeping that night. In fact, I think I was unsuccessful in achieving any sleep. I felt something was so wrong, and I had to stay awake in case it decided it wanted to consume me. Something was there with me. A week later, my parents began complaining about squirrels in the attic, and I was suddenly sleeping very well again. Then I heard it. Even after the exterminator said the holes were patched and the squirrels were gone. The steps persisted, and I got no sleep. The next day, I summoned up the resolve to go into the attic and figure this out for myself. I opened the attic door and walked up the stairs. I studied where my room would be under this attic and found it. I walked over it as far as I could go. and suddenly saw. Nothing but insulation was covering the entirety of where my room would be. That night, for the first time, I slept with my door closed, and it hasn't changed since. But the footsteps came again. Sometimes they sounded rushed, sometimes angry, sometimes quiet and sad, but they would come every night. Chelsea stopped sleeping over. I complained to my parents about the squirrel noises every now and then, but the exterminator never found anything. No traces, rats, bugs, squirrels, nothing. My parents didn't believe me, and my brother would almost ignore me when I mentioned it. He didn't want to hear it. Months went by, and finally I was able to convince Chelsea to come over for a minute and watch some TV. As she entered the house, we were gossiping about someone from school. We laughed in the hallway, and then it happened again. She stopped, and this time she fixed her eyes on the stairs leading to the media room. The stairs were zigzag stairs, so they would go up, and then it would be a flat landing, then the stairs would go to the opposite direction, and there would be the media room. On the wall after the first set of stairs was a painting my mother had painted of a thunderstorm. Chelsea parted her lips in a whisper and said, "There's someone standing at the top of your stairs. I can see them in the reflection on the painting." She left. I told my father that I suspected someone was up in the media room, and he searched everywhere, but there was nothing. I told Chelsea it must have been a shadow. A few months went by and I stopped going up to the media room. I used to secretly watch Family Guy up there when my parents were gone at work, but something was just wrong. It felt wrong being up there. Halloween came around and my brother and I were instructed to pull everything out of the attic. My brother ditched me halfway through and I was pissed. I angrily started grabbing the boxes and was verbally venting to myself about his lazy nature. I started down the steps of the attic and slowly began to lose my grip on one of the boxes. I paused to adjust, still livid. Then I heard something. A shot of air was blown from behind my head right next to my ear. I watched as a few strands of hair reacted to the shot of air and flew in front of my face on my left side, like someone had intentionally snuck up behind me and blown air at the back of my ear in an attempt to scare me. Except I was the only person here. I was venting about it after all. I knew where my brother was. He was downstairs playing Call of Duty with his dumb friends. Dad was in his room watching Judge Judy, his favourite, and Mum was on a 3-day trip, as she was a flight attendant, and she was in Seattle, 6 states away. I watched my hair fall to the side of my face. I dropped the boxes and let out a scream. I don't think I have yet to top that. 12 years later, and I've never screamed like that again. I jumped and let down the remainder of the stairs and fell out the attic door into the media room. My brother was already halfway up the stairs thinking something horrible had happened, and I trembled out what happened. Someone blew in my ear, my hair, I saw it, it flew past my head, A smile cracked on his face, and he began to laugh at me. Payback, I suppose. For when I laughed at him the first time, except this time he was the one in denial and disbelief. He was like me. He didn't want to believe. Life was already scary enough and overwhelming. Why believe that on top? My dad followed, and I immediately started lying to his horrified face. I tripped. Oh, were you alright? Yeah, just finishing getting the Halloween stuff out. Okay. I turned to my brother and threatened to hurt him if he didn't finish helping me. He didn't. I waited for my mother to come home and explained I wanted to do it with her and would help her set up Halloween stuff, and she was delighted. Over the next few years, I developed a habit of sleeping aids, nothing major, just over-the-counter stuff. To this day, I take about 3 sleeping pills a night. My husband doesn't understand how my body built up that kind of tolerance, and he doesn't believe it either. If only he knew. The footsteps never stopped. Till the day we moved out, they never ceased, and I finally started doing research into the house. Turns out it was owned by an older couple before us, and the husband took his own life via rope in the attic, right above my room. Financial trouble, apparently. I told my parents. They didn't believe me. I never told my brother. I figured he wouldn't want to know. I still wonder if his nightmares ever stopped. Mine didn't, but they have gotten more complex with age. Taxes, career, break-ins, car wrecks, plane crashes, ghosts of the past, to name a few. We moved about a year later. I came home from university one day into our new house, my mother's dream home. She asked me to go back to Longford Drive. Our old mail was apparently over there. I drove up to the house and a shiver went down my spine. It started in my left ear. I had lived in a normal home for a few months now and hadn't realized how wrong Longford Drive had felt. Something really was wrong with it. Did I let it in with the pictures that night at the cemetery? Or had it always been there, and I hadn't noticed until my brother had his episode that morning? I don't know. I don't want to know. Sometimes things are so frightening or traumatizing that you feel like you don't need to know. You don't want to face it. The world is scary enough. I walked to the front door of Longford Drive one last time and rang the doorbell. An older woman answered the door. I smiled at her and told her I was here for the mail. She jumped and went, "Oh yes, here," and handed me a bundle of letters, magazines, and what I assumed was mostly junk mail. As an adult now, I can confirm that it mostly was. I thanked her and started to turn away, but she stopped me. "Did you, live in this house, dearie?" "Yes, ma'am, for many years." "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Did you ever have problems with critters getting in the attic? We had someone come and check, but they said there was no sign of anything up there. It almost sounds like footsteps. My granddaughter comes and stays and keeps complaining that it sounds like footsteps in the attic. Does any of this sound familiar?" "No." She wouldn't have believed me anyway. But this time, I need someone to believe me. When I was 10, we lived in this house until I was 14. It was an extremely old house. When my parents bought it, it was 98 years old, and we were only the fourth ever family to live in it. The old couple before did seem eager to get out of there. My bedroom was the smallest room upstairs at the end of the hall. The attic door was in my bedroom, so no one could go in or out. My father had told me that I would sleepwalk in the house. I would walk down the hall into the room and say something like, "Don't you see I'm reading this book?" and "Maisie wants to play." They were creeped out, but chalked it up to sleepwalking. However, it was never an issue before or after this house, but it was consistent while we lived there. In my room I was laying in bed, and I heard 6 loud bangs in the attic. They were fast-paced and directly above me. My first time hearing it, I was so freaked out I ran out of the room, but my parents convinced me that it was probably just a squirrel. The second time I heard it, I went right into my twin brother's room and slept in his bunk beds. I wouldn't sleep in my room anymore. One day I had a few girlfriends over, and I was telling them about these 6 bangs in the attic, and literally, as I was talking about it, it happened. I remember going, "See?" because no one ever believed me. They were petrified, and one of them even went home right after. When we were moving out of the house, weird stuff started happening. Doors would slam shut. One door slammed shut so hard all the pots and pans fell down from the hooks. Boxes would fall, pans would fly across the room, and our dog constantly would bark and whimper. I always wondered why it got more intense when we were moving. I still live in my hometown, and a new family lives at that house. There's a guy who hangs out on the porch, and I always want to ask him if weird stuff happens, but I don't want to freak them out, in case they're not afflicted by the same thing I was. In 2005, my family moved from the home that I grew up in. I never knew if it was for a particular reason, financial trouble, family issues, or anything like that. The house that we moved to was only about an hour away, but was very country. No stoplights at intersections, barely any paved roads, and more tractors on the road than I'd ever seen in my entire life. The house was a former daycare that had a very odd layout, exit signs with floodlights above the door, and lots of random open areas. I was around 14 when we moved in, and had my own bedroom for the first time in my life. I was enrolled into the most southern country school you can imagine, literally the lowest graded public school in Texas. When we moved in, my brother and his small family, wife, son and daughter, moved in with us, due to financial issues on their part. It was to help build up good credit. My father would also suffer a crippling injury at work and be disabled a few years after moving in, causing more issues. The first few years were fun, coming home from school, playing games with my brother, teaching my nephew how to play and join us. Everything seemed normal, albeit with some high-tension moments. As to be expected with 7 people sharing a house, we had our share of fights. When my nephew was old enough to talk coherently and my niece was learning her words, they began to wake up at night, screaming and crying. My sister-in-law was there to take care of them while my brother worked the night shift at his job. With my parents becoming annoyed at being woken up by crying almost every night, my sister-in-law told us that they were having nightmares. My nephew said there was a person watching them from the open door. He did not like to talk about it very much, so I was asked to play some games with him and try and get some details. He looked up to me at the time and wanted to be like me, and I am told that he still does. I eventually got a brief description after many random games. No eyes, black like a shadow, and moves on all fours like a dog. There was also aggression from my dad to my younger brother, saying that he was being too loud when he was awake at night or going to work. I never noticed any sounds at night, and was only ever woken up by the crying children. During the summer, I got into the habit of staying up late and hanging out with my friends digitally. It was at this time I did notice some sounds, a bump of wall or a loud step. Though what my dad got wrong was that he heard it in the wall. I heard it from the attic door, which is in the hall ceiling. It was poorly constructed up there and had 2 families' worth of belongings, so falling objects were not out of the question. This continued for many years, with my niece saying that she was scared of the dark man watching her. It increased in intensity, with them freaking out individually in separate rooms independently of each other, even during the day. Our German shepherds would guard them ferociously and growl at doorways from time to time. In time, my brother and his family moved out, and it all seemed to come to an end. Years later, my sister, still living with us, had a daughter. She's 6 now. Last year she began to draw pictures, flowers, sun, fields, etc. When she was asked to draw me, she drew me but an extra. There was a tall, long-limbed, all-black figure with no eyes behind me. She would draw pictures of this figure that I thought was Slender Man, though a 5-year-old who has not seen YouTube yet couldn't possibly know who that was. She always slipped them under my door for me. When I asked her why, she said it was because he was always watching and following me, and that he crawled from the attic into my bedroom, and that he watched me from the cracks of doors. I put this aside for a while because kids are creepy anyway, but maybe my other niece and nephew had told her. But when I brought this story up to friends, they said it was the scariest thing they'd ever heard. One friend, who was much smarter than myself, pointed out that my brother's family had been gone for years, and had almost no interaction with my niece aside from the ages of 0 to 1, so she would not have had the same details that they did so long ago. Now I live with this attic man behind my shoulder, I guess. So my wife and 5 kids, ages between 12 to 23, and I just moved into a 4-bedroom home plus den. We have 3 cats, an orange one, a Maine Coon, and a black and white one. We've only lived here for a few weeks, and currently I'm not working, so I'm using my handyman skills to do some repairs. Now, the room my two oldest daughters share is in the attic, or den as they call it. Now, I may be overreacting, but the cats all absolutely refuse to go up to the attic, and when forced to, they hiss, growl, and swat at things that we can't see. Along with little things, like one of my daughter's dolls being found where she knows she didn't put them, always in their room but not on the walls or shelves. Laura's pictures are constantly falling off the walls or being found at weird angles. The cats always run out of the room and look back to the roof, hissing and growling, and even chittering. My daughters also say they feel like someone's watching them. My two youngest think it's some spirit that's watching their sisters. My middle child, well, she thinks it's an evil spirit, and my wife thinks it's her uncle. I don't really know what to believe, and I'm kind of freaked out mainly due to how the animals behave. I was always told that cats and dogs can feel the presence of spirits even though we can't see them, and I recently lost a brother, and my wife lost an uncle. So I'm just curious if it's just me, and my family's paranoid mind overreacting, or if I should be taking this seriously. Those pictures that we found at weird angles include our kids, and either her uncle or my brother, so my mind is racing trying to find a sensible reason behind this stuff. And things will only happen like this when we're in the house itself, which was built in 1932 and has an interesting history to say the least. Once burnt down by arson in 1965 in which a person perished, rebuilt in 1969, and in 77 the new owner took their own life in the attic, in what she, the real estate agent, claimed was a firearm accident. So what should I do? I already smudged the place, and it didn't seem to help. We're not moving, as buying this house kind of put me and my wife in bad debt, but it was the perfect house for our family. Honestly, if it was just me seeing these things, I'd try and grin and bear it. But my middle daughter, aged 16, will only spend a few minutes in the attic before coming down and telling us she feels like someone's watching her. And no, she said it wasn't the eldest two. That's what freaks us out the most. The cats won't go near the steps. My wife won't even go up there. She'll either yell at the girls or come get me to get them if we're leaving or having supper. Any advice on this situation would be greatly appreciated. What the hell is happening in the attic? In 2008, I had just come out of the only relationship I'd had in my life. It had lasted 11 years, and after the emotional damage that was inflicted upon me by my ex, I was left in a rather vulnerable position. I found myself without a home very quickly, and as my parents lived very far away and I had a job that I rather liked where I lived at the time, I decided to find a place as quickly as possible. The place that I found wasn't the best by any means. It was the topmost apartment of a house which was 3 stories tall that had been converted into separate abodes. The top one meant stairs, but it did come with a bonus, an attic for storage space. Lovely. This wasn't very important to me, as my ex had actually purchased the majority of the furniture, and therefore, naturally, he kept all of it. So when I moved in, there was very little besides a mattress for me to sleep on, and a table and a chair. We're talking super basic here, but I made do. In all honesty, I really just wanted to focus on my work. I really enjoyed my job, but it demanded long hours. The reason I selected the apartment was primarily due to its proximity to the train station, a whole half-a-minute walk. It was perfect. It meant that I could take the train, plug in something on my earphones, get home quickly, and pass out on the mattress, without really having to think much about anything. I ate out most of the time and didn't even have a fridge yet. I was hardly in the house at all. One day I finished work remarkably early. As I was coming through the front door, I noticed something eerie. The hatch to the attic, which had always been shut and that I'd never even explored, was open. Odd, I thought. Now, in order to close this particular attic, we had a kind of stick with a knob on the end. What you would do is you would use the stick and insert the knob into the receptacle and push the attic hatch up. You would then twist the stick in order to lock the lock mechanism. That simple. I found it odd that it was open to begin with, but dismissed it quickly, telling myself that the ex-resident must have not closed it very well, and with the house settling in one thing and another, it probably just came undone. But I made sure I had locked it good and proper. There was no way that was ever going to be opened again, at least not while I was there, as I had absolutely no desire whatsoever to go up to the attic at all. A few weeks pass, and I'm just starting to gain my bearings, and realized very early on that although it's close to the train station, I didn't really like this apartment very much. It just had a dark feeling to it. Maybe it was lack of natural light, maybe it was a whole bunch of other stuff. The point is, I felt that I didn't really want to be there. Unfortunately, I'd already put down a 6-month deposit, and I didn't want to lose even more money that the breakup had already cost me. So, I decided I would just wait it out, and in 4 months would just give my notice and leave. I can't tell you what exactly it was that made me feel this way, but even when I had a friend over to have a pizza a few days later, she told me the same thing. That she wasn't being rude, but that she just really didn't like this space, and told her that as soon as I had the money, I was going to be rid of this place. Things then started to take a weird turn, almost like me saying out loud in the house that I wanted to leave there. It began to react. Now I know that sounds ridiculous, believe me, but something that changed in the air. Everything felt a little bit darker. And it was the day after I said this with my friend that I came home again and the attic hatch was open. First, I put my stuff down and kind of stared blankly at it, looking up into the dark hole that was the maw of the attic. I could see the stairs that were in the top just poking out, ready for me to pull them down with the stick if so needed. I contemplated this for a while. Should I pull the ladder down and take a look? See what's up there, see if perhaps there's a reason why the ladder keeps falling down. After thinking on it for a minute, I closed the attic hatch and went to bed. But that morning when I woke up, the attic hatch was once again open. At this point, I was unsure if there was an issue with the house or if it was being malevolent and creepy. But I decided to use this opportunity to contact my landlord and impress upon him how irritating this was, and if he could maybe get someone round to have a look. He told me they always did that. There was a fault something but they never found what it was, and to just put up with it and close it with the stick provided. Thanks, arsehat. So unhelpful. I didn't like the fact the attic kept opening at all. And the next time it happened, a Thursday a few days after, I resigned myself to go up and inspect what on earth could be happening. I pulled down the ladder and started climbing up into the darkness of the attic. It was only when I was halfway up the stairs, nearly engulfed in the darkness of the attic above, did I realize I had no means of illumination to see exactly what I was dealing with. I pondered for a minute. My phone at the time didn't even have a flashlight on it. In fact, I'm not sure if back in 2008 they even had flashlights at all on them. If they did, mine didn't at any rate. So I used the phone screen and dimly lit around the area to see if I could find the light switch. It was off to the side, but it required climbing up a little distance further. I made my way up a little deeper in and then flicked the switch on. There was nothing in the attic. It was totally empty. A collection of wood and boards to cover up the insulation. I knew that if I were to go into one of the areas not covered by the boards, I would definitely fall through and probably nearly kill myself in the process, so on the boards I remained. There really wasn't much to look at. Insulation, wood, and that was about it. So I inspected the little twisty mechanism that was used to lock the attic. it seemed to work just fine. I couldn't really figure it out. It sat quite well in the hole, and if I were to push down on it, it would remain closed. Weird. I decided to open the attic door again and descend back down into the apartment. I shut the light off, and once I made my way down, an eerie sense of relief washed over me. It was almost like the darkness of the attic had really frightened me to my core. Maybe subconsciously. I'm not even sure what I'm trying to get at here. The point is, I was just happy to be out of that attic. I sensed something. I just knew there was something not quite right with the space. I tried to put it to the back of my mind, and time passed, and it became habit to wake up and find the attic door open, or come home from work and find it open again. It wasn't every day or night, mind you, but it always knew when to catch me off guard, almost inviting me in, inviting me to explore its depths, which held, as far as I was aware, absolutely nothing. I really didn't know what to do. I even tried putting up some duct tape, but of course it wasn't strong enough to hold the attic door once it started swinging down. The months flew by, with this happening all the time. I tried to stay out of my apartment as often as I could, choosing to spend nights at my girlfriend's houses, and even take the train up to see my folks, even though it was quite a distance away, on some weekends. By the time my lease was about to expire, I informed my landlord that he could come and check the place out, and that I would not be renewing. He came personally, did the inspection, and saw that I'd basically not done anything to the apartment at all. I still had boxes I hadn't even opened, and he couldn't take any of my deposit money, which I was very pleased with, as I'd already found a much better location I wanted to reside in the future. As he was making small talk, I offhandedly mentioned that I never managed to get the attic to stay closed for very long, and that it was quite annoying that the hatch kept on opening, and asked if maybe for the next tenant he could put some kind of lock or something to make sure that it didn't keep happening. He kind of nodded along and said there was a funny story about that attic, that he had actually bought this house about 20 years ago. There was an old couple that lived there, and the man was a huge model train fanatic. He was always in the attic. In fact, the wife told the current owner that they hardly ever closed the hatch because her husband was in there so frequently, assembling, disassembling, and always doing something with his model trains. It was an absolute fascination of his. But that one day he wasn't paying very much attention, and the poor man fell backwards out of the attic hatch and passed away shortly after. It was a terrible blow to the wife, but a fall from such a height can even end the lives of a strong young person. He told it as an anecdote, but I was absolutely horrified and wondered if perhaps the spirit of the old man kept the attic open for people to admire his long-gone train set. I don't know. I really have no answers to this story. I was left thoroughly creeped out, got my deposit back, and never looked back. I wish there was some kind of fitting conclusion to this story, but honestly that place left me profoundly creeped out, and I'm more than happy that I no longer live there. But what do you all think? I live in a top-floor apartment where the attics are segmented, meaning we can't access anyone else's attic from our own. I've been having this issue for 1.5 years now. At random intervals each day, I'll hear a scurrying or a scratching type sound seemingly coming directly from above me. For the most part, I chalked it up to rats or birds that somehow got caught in the attic, but I began questioning this. My family has also heard the sounds, so it's not like I'm just hearing them. Last year I decided to take a ladder and look at the attic. Keep in mind the roof is quite low, and I also don't trust myself actually standing up there as the ceiling is thin, and I would probably fall through. I shined a flashlight to look around, and there was nothing apart from some old chairs, a baby walker that I had as a kid, and just plain old insulation. No birds, no rats or animals to speak of. I shrug it off and go on with my life, still hearing the noises like usual. I feel a little unnerved though. The noises are usually quite quick, but sometimes they can linger. Then, something very frightening happened. I'm sitting around and I hear a thud coming from above me. I panic and ask my mum if she heard it too, and she confirmed she had, and she thought it was me. I retrieve the ladder and flashlight once more, look up this time with more intent as I move some insulation and other junk out of the way, but there's nothing. So the question is, can anyone tell me what's going on? I don't want to jump to any ghostly conclusions, but I'm started to get concerned. This happened years ago when I was 11. The house was built in the 1930s. It's a 3-floor house, but it was all separated into 5 apartments. Me and my dad lived in the rear apartment, and my mum lived in the attic apartment as my parents are split up. I was in my mum's apartment with her while she was working on something, and I was lying in bed on my phone but eventually just zoned out looking at the wall. It was around 11 p.m, and she and I decided to go to the gas station to get some snacks. The only way to get into the apartment was rather through the outside door into the apartment or through the fire escape. The door and windows were locked, and when we came back there was no way anyone could have gotten in from when we left. When we got back, I went to where her bed was and sat down to eat, and got back on my phone. I look over at the wall I was looking at before, and saw my name scratched into it, my father's name below, and my mum's name halfway carved below my father's. It was really messy but clearly legible. We've since moved out of that house, and to this day still have no explanation for it. Could it have been paranormal? My mother and I are still curious about what happened. My family and I moved into this house a year after we worked on it for 5 months. After we finished, we moved into the house basically new. We had torn everything up, replaced cabinets, and even got new plumbing installed. After we moved in, it was a relief. We had finally escaped the moving process, and we invite all of our family over for Christmas, one aunt and a grandma. After Christmas passed, my aunt would frequently ask how the house is doing, how we're doing, and our dog. We didn't find this odd as she's a family member and we just moved in, so just assumed she was curious. It was a short while after that I started hearing footsteps in the attic, soft but definitely noticeable. Since I have a tree that's taller than the house right beside the window, that's what I assumed it was. After a while I got annoyed and wondered if it really was that windy at night here. So I'll go outside to see how windy it is, and there's not even a breeze. So then I looked into the attic with a flashlight to see if my mum was up there doing something, but there was no one there. No explanation for the noise, but I could see footprints in the dust of the attic floor, and the floor was still creaking as I was up there. And I wondered if the house was just shifting. I went up to where I could see the footprints and I was confused. They were footprints bigger than my own, and I'm a 12 in men's. So I went back to my room and the footsteps are still going back and forth. I fall asleep after a while, but I never forget it. Fast forward about 3 weeks after this happened. I finally spoke to my mother about it, and she went up and looked at me and the footprints that were still in the dust. Fast forward to yesterday. I was talking to my aunt and told her about it. She asked if anything else had happened and I said it hadn't. She isn't very religious, so she asked if the footprints were bigger than mine and I said yes. She asked if they happened over my room each night and I said they did. Then she asked if I've put salt in the surrounding area of the attic to prevent whatever was causing the noise yet. I said no. She tells me to not be afraid and hangs up, convinced my aunt cursed me or something. I just wanted to share this story. I wonder what the hell is going on in my house. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If you did, well, you know what to do. Huge thanks as always to my amazing members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you sign up to either platform, you get a bunch of cool and exclusive perks only you get. And in fact, tomorrow we have some pretty good Let's Not Meet stories that are dropping just for you members and patrons. So if that interests you, feel free to check out the link in the description. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.
रिकॉर्डिंग भी मैंने प्रोग्राम हर चीज़ हो जाती है ये हीट अप भी नहीं होता आप देखते हैं बड़ी जल्दी हीट अप हो जाता है ये हीट अप भी नहीं होती सही बात है हाँ पता है ध्यान नहीं हुआ इंटरनेट खराब होगा जिसको फाइल नहीं चल रहा ध्यान नहीं हुआ ये पता नहीं उसको कोई लगाया है कुछ भी नहीं